Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation from the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's video is entitled Stonehenge, From Whence Came You? This is an amusing short article that I stumbled across online. The copy that I'm reading from was published by the monthly Masonic magazine of Lodge Stirling Royal Arch No. 76 in October 2013. The article itself is anonymous, but it does semi-seriously posit the idea that just perhaps Stonehenge is really a Masonic site. Now that's not going to cut much water with your average Neolithic historian, but it does make for an entertaining and fun little story to tell, so I hope you enjoy it. I'll place a link to the source of this article in the description below the video. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. Stonehenge, an ancient structure filled with mystery, the subject of speculation and rumour, studied and analysed by generations of men. Scientists and producers of fanciful mystique alike have found it a challenge which thwarts the analytical minds and the discerning eyes of man. What is this strange and little-known edifice which stands alone and aloof on the plains of Salisbury? To quote a statement by Russell A. Herner, author of Stonehenge, an Ancient Masonic Temple, I contend that this majestic structure is, in fact, an ancient Masonic temple. This structure, or temple as I will call it, has survived the lapse of time, the ruthless hands of ignorance, and the devastations of war for many centuries. The author does not equivocate, he does not apologize. He does, however, theorize very convincingly. Let's look at this phenomenon on the open plains of southwest England. Salisbury Plain is in Wiltshire, England, about 7 miles from the town of Salisbury. On the flat plain surrounding Stonehenge, one can see large burial mounds similar to those found in the United States. Unanswered questions come flooding into one's mind as the mystery of Stonehenge is viewed as it spreads over the plain. How was it built? What genius supplied the scientific knowledge which made it possible? When was it built, and by whom? Questions unanswered now, and possibly for all time. This was no small undertaking which our ancient craftsmen took upon themselves. It was monumental. Imagine what they faced. No high-tech equipment which today's builders use so routinely. No colleges teaching today's technology and sciences. Quarries for the special stones located from 20 to 240 miles away. No beasts of burden, only man's backs and strong limbs. A river between the quarries and the building site. A project of a magnitude exceeding the Sears Tower in Chicago or the Bay Bridge in California. For building such modern projects involved many tasks which individually were not difficult. Building Stonehenge involved many tasks which individually seemed insurmountable. To the average mind today, it was the impossible dream. But there it stands for all to see, the improbable, impossible, inconceivable project, completed by a culture which we considered to be uneducated and without artistic temperament. At a point directly northeast of the centre of the altar stone, there is a break in the circular embankments for the avenue, nearly 40 feet wide, which leads to the only element of Stonehenge which is outside this circle. The heel stone is a massive stone, 20 feet high, with 4 feet buried in the plain. It is planted at an incline of 27 degrees towards the centre of the structure. It is estimated to weigh over 35 tons and is 256 feet from the centre of the altar stone. Just within the embankments is a stone 3 feet thick, 7 feet wide, and nearly 22 feet long. This is thought to be the spot where animals were slaughtered as offerings to deity. More is involved in the construction of Stonehenge than meets the casual view. It is located and constructed by an exact scientific formula, from which can be derived much scientific data and many astrological readings. Just inside the Aubrey holes, there are 4 station stones, forming a rectangle 108 feet 8 inches wide and 262 feet 3 inches long, with its long dimension perpendicular to the northeast axis. At this latitude of 51 degrees 17 minutes north latitude, lines drawn through these 4 stones plot the rising and setting positions of the sun and moon at midsummer and midwinter. If Stonehenge were moved as little as 30 miles, this rectangle would have to be laid out as a parallelogram without right-angled corners. At the summer solstice, about June the 21st, the sun rises directly over the tip of the heel stone, its rays passing through the sarsen arch and striking at the centre of the altar stone. That one archway is 6 inches wider than all the rest. With this in mind, picture, if you will, this scene, which may or may not be purely imaginative. It is night. The darkness is broken only by a candle or two, or perhaps by the dim light of a setting moon. A group of men, marching in double file, enter the sarsen circle. They are dressed in ancient costumes of leather and rough homespun cloth. They carry implements of the builder's trades. In the centre of the group, walking between the columns and guided by 2 of the ancients, is a young man, an initiate. They circumambulate the sarsen circle, stopping at strategic points, while voices from the darkness instruct and admonish the initiate in their midst. As dawn approaches, they pass through the open end of the trilithons into the bluestone horseshoe and wend their way southeastward until the initiate and the guides stand behind the altar stone at its centre, facing northeast. The rest of the group file slowly back until they form a double line from the altar stone to the sarsen arch at the extreme northeast limit of the circle. All is quiet. The darkness dims. The initiate has time to think on what has been told and the things he has seen. The circles of stone about the group shut out nearly all light as dawn grows near. Suddenly, a glow appears, and a guide turns the initiate's head with the command, "Look to the east!" The entire area is encompassed by 2 earthen embankments separated by a ditch 17 feet wide. The inner embankment rises 7 feet above the plain to reduce the possibility of cowans and eavesdroppers. The outer mound is approximately 400 feet in diameter. Within this circle, at a diameter of 286 feet, are 56 pits called Aubrey holes, filled with solid chalk. Several of these have been excavated and found to contain human bones, spawning the assumption that they are burial spots for the leaders or officers of those who used the site. Further towards the centre, with an inside diameter of 97 feet 4 inches, is the main part of the structure, a circle of 30 stones nearly 4 feet thick, 7 feet wide, and standing 13 feet 6 inches above the ground. At a diameter of 77 feet is a circle of blue stones, 6 feet 7 inches high in the southwest, tapering to 2 feet 4 inches in the northeast. We now approach the inner sanctum of Stonehenge, a horseshoe formation of 5 huge stone groups called trilithons, with the open end to the northeast. These mammoth units consist of 3 stones each, 2 upright members, varying in height from 25 feet 6 inches in the centre and closed ends of the horseshoe, to 20 feet above ground at the open end. The third stone forms a lintel across the top and is 15 feet 5 inches long, the width of the 2 uprights. These stones are about 3 feet thick and 7 feet wide, and, at the top, are carved in the form of a mortise and tenon joint to hold the lintel in place. Within this impressive group is a second horseshoe of round blue stones, 2 feet in diameter, varying in height from 9 feet 3 inches at the closed end to 6 feet 6 inches at the end open to the northeast. These are set at a diameter of 39 feet. Central to all the other parts of the structure is one of the 2 most important elements. It lies flat on the ground and is a green stone with flecks of mica throughout. It measures nearly 2 feet thick, 3 feet 3 inches wide, and 15 feet 9 inches long. This is the altar stone. Some mention should be made of the 2 colour elements used in Stonehenge's construction, the green altar and the 2 blue stone units. Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry has this statement: "In all the ancient mysteries, this idea was carried out with green symbolizing the birth of the world, of the moral creation or resurrection of the initiate. Thus we have the theory that the initiate took his obligation on the green altar stone at Stonehenge, the creation or resurrection of a new life. The blue stones are thought to be indicative of the blue which is indelibly attached to Masonry. From all ages, blue has symbolized truth, sincerity, and fidelity. Further, Masons met in outdoor lodges under the blue canopy of heaven. Thus, today, we meet in blue lodges." A sudden shaft of light bursts through the sarsen arch as the sun rises directly over the tip of the heelstone. It crosses the space within the circle, strikes the altar stone, and shines directly on the face of the initiate. Light! The initiate has received the light. After further instruction, he is admitted to the inner circle of these rough men who somehow know many things of science and nature. A final thought. Imagery? Perhaps. Perhaps not. We may never know. But this is an indisputable fact. The construction of Stonehenge, like the Great Pyramid of Giza, was done with knowledge that would be difficult to find even today. It is done with scientific skill, which was thought to be developed many centuries after these men lived and died. The how and the why we may never understand, but the facts remain. An ancient Masonic lodge? Who knows? And one may ask, does it really matter? For whatever we choose to believe about Stonehenge, it offers material for intriguing hypothesizing and endless interesting conversations. My brothers, I give you the mystery that is Stonehenge. For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music,
texts and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries.
"3,000 years ago, King Tutankhamun was gathered to his fathers and hidden from sight, and, as it proved, from memory for 120 generations.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
Now his rocky tomb is opened, and his mummy is brought forth for investigation, to be x-rayed, to tell its extraordinary story to a race of people, of which he and his court never dreamed. The gold ornaments of his elaborate sarcophagi are still bright and shining. The wonderful carvings of the decorations of his rocky sepulchre are still as graceful as when made. The multitude of objects with which the royal body was surrounded to help it on its travels through the realms to the shades of the Egyptian heaven are, most of them, apparently in as perfect a condition as when they were put aside. But just what they mean, why they were placed there, what message they carried from the living to the dead, we have yet to discover. We will discover them. Patient scholars have untangled the meanings concealed in the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Deductive reasoning will eliminate the impossible and then the improbable from the various theories advanced to account for all that seems strange and reasonless in this most elaborate laying away of the earthly tabernacle of him who was once Pharaoh in Egypt, and, as much without his intent as without his knowledge, we will turn one more page, read one more chapter in the wonderful and vivid story of a civilization which has vanished, a people which is no more. It is not only curiosity which makes us try to read the riddle of the past, decipher the inscription on the mummy's case, understand the religion, the philosophy, the political faith, and the daily life of men who lived and loved and died 3,000 years ago. It is to help us understand the riddle of humanity as it is spread before our eyes today. It is to give us some added measure of comprehension of the great why of all life, that we try to learn what other men of other times have thought of the great problems of existence, the mystery of life, the mystery of the universe, the mystery of God. The world has other mummies than those prepared by the hands of the Egyptian undertakers. Freemasonry has her mummies, the dead bodies of her philosophies and her teachings, embalmed in symbol and preserved in cryptic sign. For many years, years numbering perhaps in hundreds, as many as has passed over the tomb of King Tutankhamun, symbols and mysteries which Freemasonry has preserved have kept inviolate the secrets which our ancient brethren discovered. Our Freemasonry, in its organization, its political system and its ritual, claims no such antiquity, but the essentials of this our fraternity do go back into ancient times as truths, as much without a beginning, as far as we know, as they seem to us necessary to be without an ending. It is our business to read these ancient doctrines, to unwrap the mummies of Freemasonry, to decipher the cuneiform inscriptions which conceal the old truths, as new today as when they were first formulated by the great teller of all truth. Freemasonry today lays before our eyes the mummies of an ancient religion, in every degree she sees conferred upon an initiate. In all our ceremonies of initiation, we perform the rite of circumambulation. Most of us perform it as solemnly as we perform it ignorantly, knowing little and too often caring less of its significance. It is truly a Masonic mummy. When loving hands unwind the wrappings, we find within this simple ceremony our kinship with the earliest men who worshipped a higher power, and learn that we have a direct kinship with the first of all religions. Circumambulation, a walking around an altar or holy spot, is an imitation. Early man worshipped the sun, which kept him warm, which defended him from wild beasts, which made his grain to grow and smiled benignly upon his life. When his God was angry, he hid his face. When he was grieved, he wept tears which were rain. When he was contented with his people, he shone full down upon them, and travelled slowly, majestically, from the east to the west, by way of the south. His bit of fire on a rude altar of stones was early man's first attempt to bring his God close to him. His slow walk about that altar, from east to west, by way of the south, was his imitation of the course of his God through the heavens. All people of all lands in all religions have walked about their place of divine habitation, and always they, as did the first worshippers, travel from east to west by way of the south. Truly is circumambulation a mummy, concealing in its prosaic footsteps a truth of the heart which well repays study. In the fellowcraft degree, we pass between the pillars, which are emblematic of those which stood upon the porch of King Solomon's temple. Modern scholars find this mummy, which not all their skill has succeeded completely in unwrapping, but enough of the ancient body of truth has been discovered to make us marvel at the gentle wisdom which made this a part of Freemasonry. From Holy Writ we learn that the significance of the pillars was an establishment of strength. Learned translators approve our belief that porch probably meant arch rather than a place of refreshment. But the arch itself is significant. It is the mummy of that ancient belief that heaven was an arch, or curved structure above the earth. Our symbolism, then, supports heaven, a place of happiness, only by established strength, and establish is but another name for control. Strength, or power, which is established or controlled, is illustrative of the principle of balance, which in turn is the underlying fundamental law of all we know of the universe, of all we learn in scientific investigation, of all we have discovered of the why of things. The Earth is balanced in its orbit about the Sun by the pull of gravity on one side, the force we call centrifugal upon the other. The explosive force, which is the incomprehensible speed of the electron about the nucleus, the whole making of what we call an atom of matter, is balanced by that other strange force we call cohesion, which keeps the atoms together and makes them form apparently an indestructible and inert matter. Love of life and selfishness are balanced against love of our fellow men and altruism. Wherever the balance is upset, some sort of chaos follows. Wherever it is preserved, peace and order result. Our pillars, then, as the mummy of the dead body of the ancient belief in the efficacy of balance, as the controlling and dominating power which rules all life, all things, all ideas, is well worth attention within the tiled doors. He who takes off the wrappings of time and discovers through wall after wall laid about it by the years the inner meaning of this carefully preserved truth is one with the wise scientist who reads painstakingly and lovingly whatever he may of the riddle which is in the coffin of the long, long dead Egyptian pharaoh. Among the many mummies of truth in Freemasonry is that of the body of ethics, standards of conduct. Freemasonry teaches in words that a Freemason must square his actions by the square of virtue, that he stands erect as invoked by the plumb. But for all the apparently plain instruction, here is a dead body of truth awaiting the reviving touch of understanding. Level and plumb are matters of longitude and latitude. What is level in New York is angular in London. The earth is a sphere, not a plane. What is level is coincident with a tangent to the face of the sphere at the place where the level is. The Woolworth Tower in New York and the Eiffel Tower in Paris are both plumb to the surface of their respective localities, but they are not parallel to each other. So a square made by a level and a plumb in one place, under one set of circumstances, may not be square in some other place, under some other circumstances. The Parisian has no moral right to condemn the Woolworth Tower because it is not parallel to the Eiffel Tower. The New Yorker cannot truthfully contend that the base of the Nelson statue in Trafalgar Square is not level because a line drawn parallel with it would not coincide with the base of Grant's tomb on Riverside Drive. Each is level for its location, as each tower is plumb in its place of erection. We must square our actions with the square of virtue, which is of our own time, our own place, our own ideas, not by those of others. To contend that there is but one square of virtue, one level, one plumb for all people of all times, is at once to arrogate to ourselves the only real possession of the truth, and to miss completely the hidden meaning in the mummy which is the symbol. But if we erect our buildings and our characters, square our foundations and our actions, stand our towers and our virtues by the measure of our own tools, our own consciences, then, indeed, do we begin to see the ancient mummy fill out to lifelike proportions, and the hue of life tinge the long dried flesh of a symbol which was old when Tutankhamun was not yet born. We are taught in Freemasonry that logic, one of the 7 liberal arts and sciences, is highly important. We are also taught mathematics and geometry, or masonry, and that the study thereof makes a wise Freemason. Yet mathematics can be used to demonstrate as a truth that which is false, and logic can be twisted to prove as a fact that which is fancy. Let him who doubts this consider this argument. Take as a premise the statements that space is infinite, without limits, and that the earth moves about the sun. The first we believe, the second we prove with a telescope as well as common experience. It follows, logically, that the earth moves in space. If the earth moves in space, it must proceed from some point or location to some other point or location. So much seems perfectly demonstrable. Yet, if space is infinite, we cannot conceive motion in it with respect to it, because anything that exists in limitless space must be considered as without relation to limits which do not exist. To move in limitless space is to become nearer to something and farther from something else. If there is no something else, obviously there can be no motion in relation to space. The same argument is applicable to time. We consider ourselves, our race, our earth, as moving through time, from something we call the beginning towards we know not what. But we cannot move in time without getting farther away from that beginning, and at the same time approaching what is connoted by a beginning, that is, an ending. Yet, if time had a beginning, what was before it? And if it has an ending, what comes after? According to logic, we can move in neither space or time if both are infinite. We cannot conceive of either as being other than infinite. We cannot conceive them as finite. Yet our common experience and our scientific measurements tell us that we do move in both space and time. Here, both logic and mathematics fail us. There are truths which neither the mind nor any tool of mind can appreciate. Logic mathematics and geometry become to us, as Freemasons, less reality than symbols. They too are mummies yet to be unwrapped, yet to bring to us the meanings concealed within them. It is no argument to say that what is concealed in a symbol must have been known to him who first concealed it. Those who wrapped the body of the dead Egyptian king in his vestments and preserved it with injections of bitumen and sweet spices of the East knew nothing of what they did save objective reality. Not for them was this preservation to be a great book to be read by the civilizations yet to come. Not for them was his tomb to be a museum, his objects of gold to speak to us of today, of their lives, their times, their loves and deaths. They did but preserve the dead. It is we who have made of that simple preservation a tool with which to learn. He who first put mathematics, geometry and logic into the body of Freemasonry may have had no knowledge that he was inspired to place there symbols which are mummies for us to unwrap. He did but add to the ritual of the degree a suggestion of knowledge which seemed to him all thinking men should have. Those who embalmed King Tutankhamun and William Preston and his contemporaries who wrote our Fellowcraft degree builded better than they knew and gave us more than they suspected. What we do with these our mummies depends upon our wit, our skill and our willingness to study. But even as King Tutankhamun, long dead, cometh back from the halls of Amenti to teach us today what ancient Egypt knew of life and death, so come back to us the gentle shades which are the spirits of mathematics, logic and geometry, as considered in Freemasonry, to teach us if we will but learn. Wisdom is not of any one age or clime, but universal. Only by patient thought and study can we hope to understand what Freemasonry really means. Even as the Egyptologist, with reverent hands, reads the riddle of long-gone years in what those years have not destroyed, so may we, as Freemasons, read the riddle of long-preserved truths in the mummies of Freemasonry as we unwrap them today.
For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries. An address given by Worshipful Brother E.J.E. McLagan, a member of the Hobart Lodge of Research, on the 21st of July, 1967. I now address the issue of the Great Dissension which occurred in the 18th century, culminating in Freemasonry in England being divided into two factions bitterly opposed to each other. These rivals became known as the Ancients, who formed a rival Grand Lodge in 1751, and the Moderns, who loyally adhered to the original Grand Lodge constituted in 1717. Until comparatively recently, the Ancients have been apt to be described as seceders or schismatics, but both terms are quite unjustified, seeing that not one of the first dissidents belonged to any lodge under the jurisdiction of the Premier Grand Lodge, and also that their ritual and customs differed scarcely from those of their Scottish and Irish brethren, whose Grand Lodges, as we shall see later, were to recognise the so-called Ancients as the Grand Lodge of England. Freemasonry, as we know it today, does not claim to be a religion, but a way of life, open to all men, irrespective of colour, race or creed, who believe in the great architect of the universe as the supreme being and regard brotherly love, relief, and truth as the standards by which a worthy Mason should endeavour to live. The moderns, however, regarded no man as worthy unless he professed himself to be a Christian, though, from studies made, there are very grave doubts that for many the sincerity of their claim was merely words, not actions. The Grand Lodge of 1717 cannot be claimed to be a truly united lodge of all lodges practising in England at the time, but it was in reality only a joining together of 6 lodges, meeting in London, combining together for the furtherance of the craft as practised in London at that time, and, as history has revealed, was nothing more than a club for aristocratic gentlemen, enrolment being limited to men of substance or royal birth. Money and birth were the qualifications to become a Freemason in the lodges under the banner of the Moderns. The first Grand Master, Anthony Sayers, Esquire, was fortunate in having under his jurisdiction 2 men who played an important role in the furtherance of Freemasonry in England. I refer to Dr. de Saglier and the Reverend Dr. James Anderson, to whom we are all indebted for a book known as History, Charges, Regulations, and Master's Songs. Anderson attempted to trace the history of Masonry back to Adam, and he was convinced that geometry or Masonry began with Lamech before the time of the Great Flood, from which only Noah and his family escaped. The early Grand Lodge recognised only 2 degrees, entered apprentice and fellow crafts. Anderson certainly allowed his imagination to enter into his history of the craft, as he includes in his list of Grand Masters Moses, Nebuchadnezzar, Alfred the Great, Cardinal Wolsey, and Sir Christopher Wren, claiming a universal Grand Lodge existed centuries before the Grand Lodge of England was formed in 1717. The death of Dr. Anderson in 1739 saw Masonry gradually fall into decline, and unscrupulous innkeepers used their taverns as lodges, displaying signs, "Masons made for 2 and 6." The famous writer Hugh Walpole, himself a Mason, claimed in 1743, "The Freemasons are in low repute in England. I believe that nothing but a persecution could bring them back into vogue again." There was no persecution, but a fierce dissension in their ranks took place in 1851, when the ancients and the moderns formed rival Grand Lodges. Just what was the cause of these dissensions? They were many, consisting of variations in ritual and beliefs. These variations can be traced to a book, Masonry Dissected by Samuel Pritchard, first published in 1730, which exposure proved so popular that it ran to 3 editions, raising great panic among the Freemasons of the period. The weak administration then governing Grand Lodge attempted to stem the exposure by denials and variations in their ritual. The Grand Master at that time was Lord Raymond, who was 22 years of age, and who during his reign of 5 years attended Grand Lodge on just 3 occasions, whilst at the same time officers and stewards remained in office throughout the whole period. The points of dissension can be stated with some certainty to be as follows. 1. The de-Christianization of Freemasonry, which had started as early as 1723. 2. Neglect of the days of St. John as a special Masonic festival. St. John's Days was the traditional birthday of John the Baptist on June the 24th. Between 1730 and 1753, not one Grand Master was installed on that day. Amongst 18th century Freemasons, this was regarded as a most serious matter. 3. Transposition of the modes of recognition in entered apprentice and fellow craft degrees. 4. Denial of any claim that Freemason was universal, thus destroying a landmark. 5. Abandonment of the esoteric part, slight though it was, in the ceremony of installing a lodge master. 6. Neglect of the catechisms attached to each degree. These catechisms are not in use today, though short ones are used as questions to be answered by a candidate prior to passing to a higher degree. 7. A difference in the password in fellow craft and master mason degrees. 8. A difference in the word for a Master Mason's degree. 9. The methods of placing the 3 lights and the wardens. And 10. Employment of deacons in lodges. These offices were used by the ancients and had been in use in Ireland as early as 1727. And 11. The refusal of Grand Lodge to recognise the Royal Arch degree. When exactly the Grand Committee, which represented the Grand Lodge of the ancients, was formed is not known, though some historians put it as early as 1739. What we do know, however, is that a General Assembly in July 1751 was held when the rules and orders to be observed by the most ancient and honourable society of free and accepted Masons were agreed by 5 members, including a Grand Secretary. In the next year we find the Grand Committee established a fact of 9 duly numbered lodges, all the ancient Masons in and adjacent to London. There was undoubtedly a large Irish element in these lodges, whose members were mainly mechanics or shopkeepers. In December 1753, Robert Turner, Master of Lodge No. 15, was appointed Grand Master with the election of Grand Wardens. The transformation to a Grand Lodge was complete. The minutes of 1752 record the appointment as Grand Secretary, one who has been characterised the most remarkable Mason that ever existed, Lawrence Dermot, who was born in Ireland in 1720. Initiated in Dublin at the age of 20, he was Master of the Dublin Lodge in 1746, and the same year was exalted in the Royal Arch, the allusion to this in the ancient records being one of the earliest known references to this degree. He came to England in 1748 as a journeyman painter, working 12 hours a day at his trade. He first joined a lodge under the moderns, but quickly transferred his allegiance to the ancients. He later became a wine merchant and prospered exceedingly. He was a dynamic personality with a good education, including Latin and Hebrew. Such was his force of character, he was the life and soul of the ancient movement, and more than a match in debate for any of his modern antagonists. In 1756, mainly through the efforts of Lawrence Dermot, the Earl of Blessington was persuaded to accept the Grand Mastership of the ancients, in proxy, as the 4 years of his term of office were to be continued. His absence can be accounted for by the fact that the 7 Years' War between 1756 and 1763 made it necessary for him to be in Ireland. Getting a member of the aristocracy as Grand Master was an undoubted boost to the ancients, and it is said that to get him to accept the office, Dermot discreetly dedicated his book A Hymen Raison to him. A Hymen Raison, the Hebrew words, when freely translated, mean help to a brother, in which he laid down the rules and regulations of the ancients' ritual, together with 118 poems and songs to be used by Masons. Through Dermot's efforts, prominent men were induced to join the ancients, thus lessening the hold of the moderns, and in 1767, Thomas Matthew, a wealthy man, became the Grand Master. He was a Roman Catholic, but in spite of the papal bulls of 1753 and 1751 forbidding Catholics to become Masons and being classified as heretics, he was a most ardent Freemason and held lodge meetings on his estate and insisted that all his servants were members of the craft. But, in spite of his actions, he was never excommunicated from his church. Some claim his great charity to the church saved him from having to suffer such indignity. The Duke of Athol became the Grand Master in 1771, and the Dukes of Athol continued to reign as Grand Masters until 1813, thus causing the ancients to be known as Athol Masons. At the height of the feud between the ancients and the moderns, both Grand Lodges fulminated against a member of the rival body being admitted to one of their lodges, even as a visitor, and to do so, the brother had to permit them to remake him before he could be allowed to enter the lodge. This rule was carried to ridiculous lengths, as in the case of the Provincial Grand Master of Quebec being refused admittance to an ancient lodge because his lodge owed its existence to the modern Grand Lodge of England, who had granted its charter. In 1742, one of the ancient lodges initiated a young man of 20, William Preston, who was destined to play a big part in the reconciliation of the two Grand Lodges. He composed and delivered lectures which were so ably written they earned him the title of Little Solomon. The fight for supremacy in England was not limited to the ancients and moderns. Two other Grand Lodges claimed the honour. They were the Grand Lodge of York, who claimed the title of Grand Lodge of all England, and the Grand Lodge of England, south of the Trent, between 1779 and 1789. The moderns endeavoured to take over control of York and were met with such an antagonistic opposition that they were forced to abandon their attempts. The Grand Lodge of England, south of Trent, was really the Lodge of Antiquity, the first of the four old lodges, and was the mainstay of the first Grand Lodge, but, owing to differences, had broken away from the Grand Lodge and set up as a rival organisation. Finally, in 1810, the Athol Grand Lodge, the Ancients, resolved that a Masonic union on principles equal and honourable to both ancient and modern lodges, and preserving the landmarks of the ancient craft, would be expedient and advantageous to both Grand Lodges. Meetings between the Earl of Moyna, Grand Master of the Moderns, and the Duke of Athol, Grand Master of the Ancients, took place, and a committee was formed to discuss reconciliation. The formation of a Lodge of Promulgation resulted in the adoption of a method of working acceptable to both parties, though the workings were mainly those in use by the ancients, notably the use of deacons, and the recognition of the expression Board of Installed Masters for the installation of a worshipful master. In 1813, the Duke of Athol, whose family had ruled the ancients since 1774, was succeeded as Grand Master by the Duke of Kent, the father of Queen Victoria. In the same year, 21 Articles of Union between the ancients and the moderns were signed and sealed by both Grand Masters. The second article lays down that pure and ancient masonry consists of 3 degrees and no more, viz., those of entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, including the supreme order of the Royal Arch. The Articles of Union were soon ratified by both Grand Lodges and the Grand Lodge of York. Thus was born the present United Grand Lodge of England. The first Grand Master was the Duke of Sussex, who was proposed for office by the Duke of Kent, thus happily concluding a feud that had lasted for 60 years. This reunion was to prove of inestimable benefit to the Freemasonry and raise the craft to the highly respected status that has been maintained to the present day.
Welcome to From the Quarries. Tonight's presentation, The First Tool Engineer, is a short piece of speculative work relating to every mason's favourite artificer in metals. It was written by George L. Miller, and the copy I have is undated. It is clearly of some antiquity, as its language and a casual reference to slave ownership are definitely not appropriate in today's moral climate. With this caveat, I hope you enjoy it.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
This short presentation concerns the question of who was the first tool engineer. Much of the thesis was given to me by Robert B. Douglas, who I do not know to be a Mason, but I do know that he is past president of the American Society of Tool Engineers. It is an expression of how some of the things that we learn as Masons are also part of the sectarian world, and, as we know them as part of our legend, many are pretty close to the facts. Time and again, one finds Eli Whitney, famed for the invention of the cotton gin and for the introduction of mass production techniques in the manufacture of arms, accoladed as the first tool engineer. In the cavalcade of tool engineers, Mr. Eli Whitney is very much a Johnny-come-lately. Let us bow to his genius, let us acknowledge his extraordinary contribution to interchangeability in complex mechanisms, but let us not call him father. The art and science of tool engineering has deeper roots than the 19th century. The real father of tool engineering was born just 8 generations out of Eden in the antediluvian night. Scholars put his birth at 1,056 years after the birth of the first man. He was the son of Lamech and the grandson of Methuselah, and his name was Tubal-Cain. We can read his brief but eloquent biographical sketch in Genesis 4, verse 22. Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. In other words, the father of tool engineers and tool engineering education. There were giants in the earth in those days. Lamech, crude, cruel, lusting descendant of Cain, was a mighty hunter and a mighty warrior, but his scope was limited. The old man was so taken up with the day-by-day task of protecting the family and homestead against the depredations of rival families and wild beasts that there was no progress and but little feeling of security in the family. The oldest son was a musician, the other a singing cowboy. Then came Tubal-Cain, son of the practical mother Zillah. Watching his father hunt with rough but precious weapons, he realized how tenuous was the claim to survival of the whole tribe should ill fortune break or carry off one of the few miserable spears or arrows in the side of a wounded lion. The family was left defenseless for days, while a new one was painstakingly fashioned out of stone by hand methods. The herds were neglected, the music was stilled, while everyone pitched in to make a new supply. The key to survival was production. Only with a large and assured supply of weapons could the family maintain the unrelenting struggle against the environment. Stop or threaten that supply, and not only the arts of his brother Jubal, but food itself must be rationed or cut off altogether until the deficiency was made up. So little Tubal-Cain, while hardly more than a boy, studied the problem of production. From foundry to forge to finished grind, he studied and experimented with the processes of forming and shaping metal. When one process had been mastered, he lost no time in breaking in a couple of slaves to keep production rolling, while he went on to pioneer the next step. Thus was the division of labour first applied. The same techniques that made arrowheads were gradually applied to spears, knives, and short swords. A continuous flow of weapons came from the production lines out behind old Lamech's hut. Behind the wall of weapons in the field, Jubal's commerce and Jubal's cultural arts were free to flourish, and in Lamech's yard the music of Tubal-Cain's forge made a fitting background for the melody of Jubal's oaten pipes. But restless Tubal-Cain must needs press on if the future be secured. The discovery of the techniques must be formulated into an organized body of knowledge, certain theories drawn, and the principles laid down for the guidance of others. Tool engineering, as a formal science, was conceived and born in the wilderness of the land of Nod. The safety of the tribe, the advancement of science, the encouragement of commerce and the arts, in short, the upward progress of mankind, could not be secured or consolidated if these secrets were left to rust and grow stale in the mind of only one man. So Tubal-Cain called them all in, his brothers and his cousins, and their slaves and their children, and he taught them those things that he knew, and they laboured together, each according to his abilities and his industry. As great as had been his contribution to the perfection of technique, greater still was his vision of the free interchange of scientific knowledge. When the critical shortage of arms had been changed into an abounding surplus, their lines were converted to the implements of peace, to the production of brass bowls and lamps, and great was the light and prosperity that settled on the land. Unfortunately, with the great floods that were sent after his death to cleanse the world, were washed away both the tools and the memory of Tubal-Cain's works. To Eli Whitney and the famous tool engineers that have followed him has been given once more the key to gradually unlock the door of that golden science once put into the hands of Tubal-Cain in his youth. As later children of their heritage, let us honour Father Tubal-Cain's memory and cherish his dream.
For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries. Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. The Old Charges of Freemasonry by Brother H. L. Hayward. Section 1. What the Old Charges Are. I have just come from reading an article in one of the more obscure Masonic periodicals, in which an unknown brother lets go with this very familiar remark. As for me, I am not interested in the musty old documents of the past. I want to know what's going on today. The context makes it clear that he had in mind the old charges. A sufficient reply to this ignoramus is that the old charges are among the things that are going on today. Eliminate them from Freemasonry as it now functions, and not a subordinate lodge, or a grand lodge, or any other regular Masonic body could operate at all. They are what the Constitution is to the United States government, and what its statutes are to every state in the Union. All the constitutions, statutes, laws, rules, bylaws and regulations, to some extent or other, hark back to the old charges, and without them, Masonic jurisprudence, or the methods for governing and regulating the legal affairs of the craft, would be left hanging suspended in the air. In proportion as Masonic leaders, Grand Masters, Worshipful Masters, and jurisprudence committees ignore, or forget, or misunderstand these Masonic charters, they run amok and lead the craft into all manner of wild and un-Masonic undertakings. If some magician could devise a method whereby a clear conception of the old charges and what they stand for could be installed onto the head of every active Mason in the land, it would save us all from embarrassment times without number, and it would relieve Grand Lodges and other grand bodies from the needless expenditure of hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. If there is any practical necessity, any hard, down, next-to-the-ground necessity anywhere in Freemasonry today, it is for a general, clear-headed understanding of the ancient constitutions and landmarks of the order. By the old charges is meant those ancient documents that have come down to us from the 14th century and afterwards, in which are incorporated the traditional history, the legends and the rules and the regulations of Freemasonry. They are called variously ancient manuscripts, ancient constitutions, legends of the craft, Gothic manuscripts, old records, etc., etc. In their physical makeup, These documents are sometimes found in the form of handwritten paper or parchment rolls, the units of which are either sewed or pasted together, of handwritten sheets, stitched together in book form, and in the familiar printed form of a modern book. Sometimes they are found incorporated in the minute book of a lodge. They range in estimated date from 1390 until the first quarter of the 18th century, and a few of them are specimens of beautiful Gothic script. The largest number of them are in the keeping of the British Museum. The Masonic Library of West Yorkshire, England, has in custody the second largest number. As already said, these old charges, for such is their most familiar appellation, form the basis of modern Masonic constitutions and therefore jurisprudence. They establish the continuity of the Masonic institution through a period of more than 5 centuries, and by fair implication much longer, and at the same time, and by token of the same significance, prove the great antiquity of Masonry by written documents, which is a thing no other craft in existence is able to do. These manuscripts are traditional and legendary in form, and are therefore not to be read as histories are. Nevertheless, a careful and critical study of them based on internal evidence sheds more light on the earliest times of Freemasonry than any other one source whatever. It is believed that the old charges were used in making a Mason in the old operative days, that they served as constitutions of lodges in many cases, and sometimes functioned as what we today call a warrant. The systematic study of these manuscripts began in the middle of the 19th century, at which time only a few were known to be in existence. In 1872, William James Hewen listed 32. Owing largely to his efforts, many others were discovered, so that in 1889 Gould was able to list 62, and Hewen himself in 1895 tabulated 66 manuscript copies, 9 printed versions, and 11 missing versions. This number has been so much increased of late years that in the AQC volume 31, page 40 of 1918, Brother Roderick H. Baxter, now Worshipful Master of Quato Coronati Lodge, listed 98, which number included the versions known to be missing. Brother Baxter's list is particularly valuable in that he gives data as to when and where these manuscripts have been reproduced. For the sake of being better able to compare one copy with another, Dr. W. Begeman classified all the versions into 4 general families: the Grand Lodge family, the Sloane family, the Roberts family, and the Spencer family. These family groups he divided further into branches, and he believed that the Spencer family was an offshoot of the Grand Lodge family and the Roberts family an offshoot of the Sloane family. In this general manner of grouping, the erudite doctor was followed by Hewen, Gould, and their colleagues, and his classification still holds in general. Attempts have been made in recent years to upset it, but without much success. The old charges are peculiarly English. No such documents have ever been found in Ireland. Scotch documents are known to be of English origin. It was once held by Findel and other German writers that the English versions ultimately derived from German sources, but this has been disproved. The only known point of similarity between the old charges and such German documents as the Torgau Ordinances and the Cologne Constitutions is the legend of the 4 crowned martyrs, and this legend is found among English versions only in the Regius manuscript. As Gould well says, the British manuscripts have neither predecessors nor rivals. They are the richest and rarest things in the whole field of Masonic writings. When the old charges are placed side by side, it is immediately seen that in their account of the traditional history of the craft they vary in a great many particulars. Nevertheless, they appear to have derived from some common origin, and, in the main, they tell the same tale, which is as interesting as a fairy story out of Grimm. Did the original of this traditional account come from some individual, or was it born out of a floating tradition, like the folk tales of ancient people? Authorities differ much on this point. Begeman, not only declared that the first version of the story originated with an individual, but even set out what he deemed to be the literary sources used by that great unknown. The Doctor's arguments are powerful. On the other hand, others contend that the story began as a general, vague oral tradition, and that this was in the course of time reduced to writing. In either event, why was the story ever written? In all probability, an answer to that question will never be forthcoming. But W. Harry Rylands and others have been of the opinion that the first written versions were made in response to a general writ for return issued in 1388. Rylands' words may be quoted. "It appeared to me not at all impossible that much, if not all, of the legendary history was composed in answer to the writ for returns issued to the guilds all over the country in the 12th year of Richard II, AD 1388. Section 2. The two oldest manuscripts. In 1757, King George II presented to the British Museum a collection of some 12,000 volumes, the nucleus of which had been laid by King Henry VII, and which came to be known as the Royal Library. Among these books was a rarely beautiful manuscript written by hand on 64 pages of vellum, about 4 by 5 inches in size, which a cataloguer, David Castley, entered as number 17A1 under the title A Poem of Moral Duties, here entitled Constitutionis Artis Geometri Secundum. It was not until Mr. J. O. Halliwell, afterwards Halliwell Phillips, a non-Mason, chanced to make the discovery that the manuscript was known to be a Masonic document. Mr. Phillips read a paper on the manuscript before the Society of Antiquaries in 1839, and in the following year published a volume entitled Early History of Freemasonry in England, in which he incorporated a transcript of the document, along with a few pages in facsimile. This important work will be found incorporated in the familiar Universal Masonic Library, the rusty sheepskin bindings of which strike the eye on almost every Masonic bookshelf. This manuscript was known as the Halliwell, or as the Halliwell Phillips, until some 50 years afterwards Gould rechristened it in honour of the Royal Library in which it is found, the Regius, and this since then has become the more familiar cognomen. David Castley, a learned specialist in old manuscripts, dated the Regius as of the 14th century. E. A. Bond, another expert, dated it as of the middle of the 15th century. Dr. Kloss, the German specialist, placed it between 1427 and 1445. But the majority have agreed on 1390 as the most probable date. It is impossible to arrive at absolute certainty on this point, says Hewan, whose old charges should be consulted, save that it is not likely to be older than 1390, but maybe some 20 or so years later. Dr. W. Begerman made a study of the document that has never been equalled for thoroughness, and arrived at a conclusion that may be given in his own words. It was written towards the end of the 14th, or at least quite at the beginning of the 15th century, not in Gloucester itself as being too southerly, but in the north of Gloucester, or in the neighbouring north of Herefordshire, or even possibly in the south of Worcestershire. The Regius manuscript is the only one of all the versions to be written in metre, and it may have been composed by a priest, if one may judge by certain internal evidences, although the point is disputed. There are some 800 lines in the poem, the strictly Masonic portion coming to an end at line 576, after which begins what Hewan called a sermonette on moral duties, in which there is quite a Roman Catholic vein, with references to the Sins 7, the Sweet Lady, referring to the Virgin, and to holy water. There is no such specific Mariolatry in any other version of the old charges, though the great majority of them express loyalty to the Holy Church, and all of them, until Anderson's familiar version, are specifically Christian so far as religion is concerned. The author furnishes a list of 15 points and 15 articles, all of which are quite specific instructions concerning the behaviour of a craftsman. This portion is believed by many to have been the charges to an initiate as used in the author's period, and is therefore deemed the most important feature of the book, as furnishing us a picture of the regulations of the craft at that remote date. The craft is described as having come into existence as an organised fraternity in King Adelstune's day, but in this the author contradicts himself because he refers to things written in the old books, and takes it for granted a certain antiquity for the masonry which, as in all the old charges, is made synonymous with geometry, a thing very different in those days from the abstract science over which we laboured during our school days. The Regius poem is evidently a book about masonry rather than a document of masonry, and may very well have been written by a non-mason, although there was no way in which we can verify such theories, especially seeing that we now know nothing about the document save what it has to tell us about itself, which is little. In his commentary on the Regius, R. F. Gould produced a paragraph that has ever since served as the pivot of a great debate. It reads as follows, and refers to the sermonette portion which deals with moral duties. These rules of decorum read very curiously in the present age, but their inapplicability to the circumstances of the working masons of the 14th or 15th centuries will at once be apparent. They were intended for the gentlemen of those days, and the instruction for behaviour in the presence of a lord, at table, and in the society of ladies, would have all been equally out of place in a code of manners drawn up for the use of a guild or craft of artisans. The point of this is that there must have been present among the craftsmen of that time a number of men not engaged at all in labour, and therefore were, as we would now describe them, speculatives. This would be of immense importance if Gould had made good his point, but he was not able to do so. The greatest minds of the period in question were devoted to architecture, and there is no reason not to believe that among the craftsmen were members of good families. Also, the craft was in contact with the clergy all the while, and therefore many of its members may well have stood in need of rules for preserving proper decorum in great houses and among the members of the upper classes. From Woodford until the present time, the great majority of Masonic scholars have believed the old charges to have been used by a strictly operative craft, and it is evident that they will continue to do so until more conclusive evidence to the contrary is forthcoming than Gould's surmise. Next to the Regius, the oldest manuscript is that known as the Cook. It was published by R. Spencer in London in 1861 and was edited by Mr. Matthew Cook, hence the name. In the British Museum's catalogue, it is listed as Additional Manuscript 23,198 and has been dated by Hewen at 1450 or thereabouts, an estimate which most of the specialists have concurred. Dr. Beggerman believed the document to have been compiled and written in the southeast portion of the Western Midlands, say in Gloucestershire or Oxfordshire, possibly also in southeast Worcestershire or southwest Warwickshire. The Book of Charges, which forms the second part of the document, is certainly of the 14th century, the historical or first part of quite the beginning of the 15th. The Cook manuscript was most certainly in the hands of Mr. George Payne when, in his second term as Grand Master in 1720, he compiled the General Regulations, and which Anderson included in his own version of the Constitutions, published in 1723. Anderson himself evidently made use of lines 901 to 960 of the manuscript. The Cook was reprinted in facsimile in 1890, and included therewith a commentary by George William Speth, which is, in my own amateur opinion, an even more brilliant piece of work than Gould's commentary on the Regius. Some of Speth's conclusions are of permanent value, and I paraphrase his findings in my own words. The manuscript is a transcript of a yet older document, and was written by a Mason. There were several versions of the charges to a Mason in circulation at the time. The manuscript is in two parts, the former of which is an attempt at a history of the craft, the latter of which is a version of the charges. Of this portion, Speth writes that it is far and away the earliest, best, and purest version of the old charges which we possess. The manuscript mentions 9 articles, and these, evidently, were legal enforcements at the time. The 9 points given were probably not legally binding, but were morally so. Congregations of Masons were held here and there, but no General Assembly or Grand Lodge. Grand Masters existed in fact, but not in name, and presided at one meeting of a congregation only. Many of our present usages may be traced in their original form to this manuscript. Section 3. Anderson's Constitutions and Other Printed Versions. One of the most important of all the versions of the old charges is not an ancient original at all, but a printed edition issued in 1722 and known as the Roberts, though it is believed to be a copy of an ancient document. Of this, W. J. Hewen writes, "The only copy known was purchased by me at Brother Spencer's sale for Masonic works, etc., in 1875, for £8 10s, on behalf of the late Brother R. F. Bauer, and is now in the magnificent library of the Grand Lodge of Iowa, USA. This tiny volume is easily the most priceless Masonic literary possession in America, and was published in exact facsimile by the National Masonic Research Society, with an eloquent introduction by Dr. Joseph Fort Newton in 1916. The Reverend Edmund Cox edited a famous reprint in 1871. It is a version meriting the most careful study on the part of the Masonic student, because it had a decided influence on the literature and jurisprudence of the craft after its initial appearance. It appeared in one of the most interesting and momentous periods of modern speculative Masonry, namely, in the years between the organization of the First Grand Lodge in 1717 and the appearance of Anderson's Constitution in 1723. It is the earliest printed version of the old charges known to exist. Another well-known printed version is that published in 1724 and known as the Briscoe. This was the second publication of its kind. The third printed version was issued between 1728 and 1729 by Benjamin Cole, and known as the Cole edition in consequence. This version is considered a literary gem in that the main body of the text is engraved throughout in most beautiful style. A special edition of this book was made in Leeds in 1897, the value of which was enhanced by one of W. J. Hewen's famous introductions. For our own modern and practical purposes, the most important of all the versions ever made was that compiled by Dr. James Anderson in 1723 and everywhere known familiarly as Anderson's Constitution. A second edition appeared, much changed and enlarged, in 1738, a third by John Entick in 1756, and so on every few years until by 1888 22 editions in all had been issued. Anderson's title page is interesting to read. The Constitution, History, Laws, Charges, Orders, Regulations, and Usages of the Right Worshipful Fraternity of Accepted Freemasons, collected from their general records and their faithful traditions of many ages, to be read at the admission of a new brother, when the Master or Warden shall begin, or order some other brother to read as follows, etc. After the word follows, Anderson's own version of Masonic history begins with this astonishing statement. Adam, our first parent, created after the image of God, the great architect of the universe, must have had the liberal sciences, particularly geometry, written on his heart. Thus did Mr. Anderson launch his now thrice familiar account of the history of Freemasonry, an account which, save in the hands of the most expert Masonic antiquarian, yields very little dependable historical fact whatsoever, but which, owing to the prestige of its author, came to be accepted for generations as a bona fide history of the craft. It will be many a long year yet before the rank-and-file brethren shall have learned that Dr. Anderson's history belongs in the realm of fable for the most part, and has never been accepted as anything else by knowing ones. The established facts concerning Dr. Anderson's own private history comprise a record almost as brief as the short and simple annals of the poor. Brother J.T. Thorpe, one of the most distinguished of veterans among living exile Masonic scholars, has given it an excellent brief form. Of this distinguished brother we know very little. He is believed to have been born, educated, and made a Mason in Scotland, subsequently settling in London as a Presbyterian minister. He is mentioned for the first time in the Proceedings of the Grand Lodge of England on September the 29th, 1721, when he was appointed to revise the old Gothic constitutions. This revision was approved by the Grand Lodge of England on September the 29th in 1723, in which year Anderson was Junior Grand Warden under the Duke of Wharton. He published a second edition of the Book of Constitutions in 1738 and died in 1739. This is all that is known of him. In his 1738 edition, Anderson so garbled up his account of the founding of Grand Lodge and contradicted his own earlier story in such fashion that R.F. Gould was inclined to believe either that he had become disgruntled and full of spleen, or else that he was in his dotage. Be that as it may, Anderson's historical pages are to be read with extreme caution. His constitution itself, or that part dealing with the principles and regulations of the craft, is most certainly a compilation made of extracts of other versions of the old charges, pretty much mixed with the doctor's own ideas in the premises, and so much at variance with previous customs that the official adoption thereof caused much dissension among the lodges, and may have had something to do with the disaffection which at last led to the formation of the ancient Grand Lodge of 1751 or thereabouts. The Anderson of this latter body, which in time waxed very powerful, was Lawrence Dermot, a brilliant Irishman who as Grand Secretary was leader of the ancient forces for many years, and who wrote for the body its own constitution called a Hymen Raison, which cryptic title is believed by some to mean Worthy Brother Secretary. The first edition of this important version was made in 1756, a second in 1764, and so on until by the 1813 an eighth had been published. A very complete collection of all editions is in the Masonic Library at Philadelphia. A few Grand Lodges, Pennsylvania among them, continue to call their Book of Constitutions the Hymen Raison. Anderson himself is still on the rack of criticism. Learned brethren are checking his statements, shifting his pages, and leaving no stone unturned in order to appraise correctly his contributions to Masonic history. But there is not so much disagreement on the Constitution. In that document, which did not give satisfaction to many upon its appearance, Anderson, as Brother Lionel Vibert has well said, builded better than he knew, because he produced a document which until now serves as the groundwork of nearly all Grand Lodge constitutions having jurisdiction over symbolic masonry, and which, once and for all, established speculative Freemasonry on a basis apart and with no sectarian character either as to religion or politics. For all his faults as an historian, and these faults were as much of his age as of his own shortcomings, Anderson is a great figure in our annals and deserves, at the hand of every student, a careful and reverent study. For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts, and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries.
For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons for Freemasons. Visit FromTheQuarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.